Yeah, well, Jesus had I worked with yeah. You know, I know. You're gonna be seeing this stuff that you see. Yeah, so that's why you. But I had to do that, now I'm sure. I was thinking I was saying that issue. So the quality, yeah, it's small. We have to go back and six.
So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the SEM seminar. We're going to start now. I just want to remember people who are online that they can ask their questions on the Q&A tab. And then I will give the word to Margaret, who will introduce her.
Hello, everybody. So I'm very happy to welcome and introduce Meg Crofoot, the speaker of the day. So Meg is an American anthropologist and currently a professor at the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior and the University of Constance. And she's a specialist in decision-making, movement behaviors, and also sleep ecology in primates, mainly in baboons and in capuchin. Today she will speak about sleeping, so that's so cool. So a few words, now I'm reading my notes about Meg's career. So she obtained her PhD in 2008 from the Harvard University and then joined Princeton as a lecturer in evolutionary biology. And in 2010, Meg became a researcher associate at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. She then moved to the University of California, Davis in 2013, right? Okay. Where she joined the Department of Anthropology. And finally, in 2019, Meg joined the University of Constance and the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior. And she was made an Alexander von Humboldt Foundation Fellow and serves as the director of the Department of Ecology of Animal Society. So I'm very happy to have you here today, Meg, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It's a real pleasure. Are you guys able to hear me in the back okay? Okay. Yeah. If I start to mumble or talk to, let me know and I can project better. As Marie said, I direct the Department for the Ecology of Animal Societies at the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior in Constance. We're a relatively new Max Planck that actually kind of came into being only in 2019. So we're just sort of getting our feet under us. And research in my department focuses on how animal societies emerge, like what are the rules of interaction that create stable social congregations where animals are joined together by a shared history of past interactions and by the social bonds that connect them. And then how these animal societies function, how the suite of social connections allows groups of animals to do more together than they could do alone. And as Marie said, my work, like what I know how to work with, what I know how to study are primates, but in the department, we work across a wide range of mostly mammal species, from bats to lions, with a lot of primate work thrown in there. But today I'm going to be talking exclusively about baboons and the relatively new research program that we have that's really focused on, well, on sleep and on the social side of sleep. And we don't perhaps, oh, now I can't advance my slides. There we go. We maybe don't typically think of sleep as being a social behavior, but as any of you guys who have small kids probably are intimately aware, animals that live in groups don't sleep in isolation. Our sleep is coordinated with and coupled to that of other members of our group. So despite this fact, sleep research has focused almost exclusively on either people or animals, individuals, sleeping alone in isolated laboratory settings. And so from my perspective, it's kind of no wonder that sleep remains such an enigma. To the best of our knowledge, all animals sleep, from honeybees to humans. Every animal that we've looked at so far seems to have this period of behavioral quiescence where they show reduced sensitivity to environmental stimuli. But despite the ubiquity of this behavior, despite the fact that it seems to be imperative, animals need to sleep, why we do it remains the subject of heated debate. We've got some actual sleep scientists in the room today here, so I'm perhaps overstepping. But when I read the literature, I don't see a whole lot of agreement. I mean, there's clear agreement that sleep serves a number of biologically really important functions, but why it evolved, what was the kind of original reason for its evolution, and then how does that manifest across the diversity of life? We still have a tremendous amount to learn. And in the human realm, the increasing ubiquity of these automated activity trackers, whether it's an Oura ring like this or your Fitbit on your wrist, are letting us take human sleep research out of the lab and into the field to see how humans sleep in our natural habitats, meaning not in a lab, but in our own homes. And I think what we're finding as we start to look at this data is that sleep and sociality are coupled together and intertwined in a set of really interesting ways. What we're sort of seeing is that sleep and social behavior are tied together in the self-reinforcing feedback loop where sleep loss causes deficits in social cognition, so the sort of fluency of social interaction, and seems to actually be causally related to loneliness. And at the same time, social isolation and loneliness seem to disrupt sleep and impair sleep quality. And this is serious. 1 in 3 adults, so look to your left, look to your right. How many people here slept at least 7 hours a night last night? Raise your hands if you slept 7 or more hours. Even worse. So 1 in 3 people, according to the CDC in the US, the Center for Disease Control, are chronically underslept. And in fact, the CDC has declared insufficient sleep a public health epidemic. So what does this mean? Well, at the individual level, failure to get enough sleep is related to a range of health problems, from heart attacks and cancer to problems with cognition and social functioning. And we know that if you sleep deprive an animal long enough, it's considered a form of torture, and it can also lead to death in extreme cases. But zooming out, sleep deprivation at this scale carries costs not only for us as individuals, but also for the safety and the economic outlook of our societies. So, for example, sleep loss and sleep disorders strongly increase the chances of contributing to a car crash, and have also been causally linked to a variety of catastrophes, from the Chernobyl nuclear explosion to the Exxon Valdez oil spill to the Shuttle Challenger explosion and tragedy. Humans make mistakes when we haven't slept enough. An economic analysis by the Rand Corporation estimates that through the combination of higher mortality related to insufficient sleep and sort of impaired functioning, we're losing up to $680 billion a year in economic output across just these 5 countries. So today, as we're sort of coming out the other side of a pandemic related social fragmentation and social sort of increase in social isolation, pandemic really accelerated a suite of behavioral changes in human behavior towards increasing social fragmentation. I would argue that we urgently need to understand how social environments shape and are shaped by the sleep patterns of their members. So I just talked a lot about humans. Now I'm going to stop talking about humans and talk about a monkey, baboons. And I would actually argue that if we want to develop a science of the sociality of sleep, although it's very important for humans, there's some really fundamental challenges of starting to develop this kind of research program in human societies. And one part of this is, one of the reasons it's hard, or you maybe even can't do it within human societies, is in part because our sleep is so strongly shaped by our cultural practices, and particularly in the industrialized West, where most scientific research gets funded and conducted. We sleep profoundly differently, not only compared to kind of the majority of people around the world, but also certainly to people throughout, how humans slept throughout the vast majority of our evolutionary history. It is not normal that we get to sleep in climate-controlled, well-protected bedrooms with beds. But that is not how the majority of humanity sleeps today. It's also not how we would have slept over our evolutionary history. For a variety of very good reasons, we protect ourselves from the external environment, from things that might disrupt our sleep, from the kinds of ecological trade-offs that may have been very important to thinking about how we as humans evolved our sleep patterns and sleep habits. And then it turns out who you sleep with has some privacy concerns when you're talking about humans. So social sleep has challenges to thinking about how we study it that baboons, you don't have to worry about. Who baboons sleep with, well, at least currently, we've decided we don't have to worry about their privacy. So I think it's really important as we start to think about developing an understanding of sleep in fully embedded social and ecological contexts, that we shift from a view that sees sleep only as a physiological imperative of individuals, which of course it is, but it's not only that. It's also, we have to understand it as a social process that plays out at the group and population levels. So I don't probably have to tell anyone in this audience, but studying behavior in natural habitats has a whole variety of challenges, including but not limited to the fact that visibility is limited. It's hard to see what animals are doing. It can be hard to not only follow single individuals, but also think about the ways in which behavioral decisions are socially contingent. How what I choose to do is being influenced by what you all are doing at any particular moment in time. Cell phone addiction to the rescue. We're sort of living in a time where all of our cell phone addictions are driving massive technological advances, both in terms of the size, the power, efficiency of a whole suite of sensors that are letting us track animals the way we track ourselves, inadvertently or with more or less of our own awareness and willingness. And so one of the things that we're doing in my research group is trying to develop a toolkit which allows us to track not only where animals go, so, sensors affixed to animals that give us information via GPS tracking of where they go, via accelerometers, which track behavioral patterns, so where they go, what they're doing, and then with acoustic recorders attached to those collars, what they're saying. So what you're seeing here is a troop of baboons moving across an open, relatively kind of savanna scrubland habitat in Kenya. Each dot is an animal, colored according to their age, sex, class, with dark and light blue being adult and subadult males, red and orange, adult and subadult females. And you can see they're coming to this kind of darker section, more dense, maybe where a predator might be lurking. They don't want to go through it. There's a bit of a disagreement here. Reach paralysis, we're going to go left, we're going to go right. And eventually, one group wins out. So with these kinds of high resolution tracking data, we can define a whole variety of social relationships within groups, from dominance relationships to affiliative relationships. And it allows us to answer questions like, how do baboons make decisions? And so with data like this, one of the things we found is, like, despite baboons' really highly despotic social structure, well-defined dominance hierarchies, when it comes to these small-scale movement decisions, it's basically a straight-up majority rule voting system. If I'm choosing, do I go left or do I go right, I follow whichever one more of my group is doing. Of course, social considerations aren't the only thing that are important. All of these decisions are being made embedded within a landscape that is complex. So if we put ourselves in sort of a baboon's eye position, from the top down, it looks like you have all this information. When you're actually a baboon, who you can see, what information you have available to you, acoustically, visually, probably smell-wise as well, is much more limited and is strongly influenced by the environment that you're moving through. And one of the interesting things that we found is that the environment actually can modulate the decision-making process. So baboons like to walk on roads, probably because they're flat, they're relatively, decisions don't have to get made. It's probably easy to walk. Once you get a baboon group onto a road, a simple majority isn't enough to get them off the road again. The decision rule changes. It takes a super majority to get a baboon, to pull a baboon group off a road once they're on it. So environment and social consideration are interacting with each other to shape individual decision-making processes. We're also using similar kinds of technologies as a window into what I think of as the other 50%. If you study animal behavior, you probably want to study your animal species when they are behaving. And I would have, I think I spent most of my career thinking that sleep was possibly the most boring thing one could ever think about studying. In my first failed PhD project, I spent a lot of time reading Russian novels below sleeping orangutans, being like, please wake up and do something. But I think that this tendency towards wanting to study action and interaction means that we've basically ignored, if you work on the equator, we've basically ignored 50% of animals' lives. We've ignored the 50% where, well, they're doing less, perhaps. It's also the 50% where our own sensory perceptions fail us. We don't see very well in the dark. We also need to sleep. So if you're someone who's gotten up at 4 to go follow monkeys all day, by the time they go into their sleep tree, you're happy to assume that they're not going to do anything important until you show up the next morning and you just go home and sleep. So we make this simplifying assumption, right? That nothing important happens at night because I need to sleep. Using sort of combination of similar sensors, so accelerometry, GPS, and also thermal video, though, we can get a window, a new way of seeing this part of the animal's lives that we've typically ignored. So today, we're going to talk about I'm going to show you some results from some work that my group has done, and then I'm going to show you some sort of preliminary results from where we're taking this project. Some unpublished, not as well digested. So towards the end of the talk, I'm going to have more questions than answers. But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the socio-ecological trade-offs of sleeping in the wild, the social dynamics of sleep, and what it means to be sleeping not only as within a group, but within a group that shares a landscape with a whole population. So if you're trying to study sleep in the wild, one of the challenges you face is like, is this baboon asleep? Or is he just resting his eyes? And how do you know the difference? The gold standard for sleep research is polysomnography. So the recording of electrical signals from the brain, from muscles, that allow us to not only say whether an animal or a human is asleep or not, but also kind of what stage of sleep, what is the architecture of their sleep process. No self-respecting baboon is going to let you do this to them. And so we need a different way of approaching this question. And so our first pass at this was, as I said, to use accelerometry data. So data from a really simple, really energy efficient sensor, which measures motion in 3 dimensions, and it's triaxial accelerometer, so the X, Y, and Z axes. And then you can basically simplify down to like a single metric that kind of aggregates all of that movement. And so what you're seeing here is this is VEDBA, vectorized dynamic body acceleration. It's a way of taking those 3 axes and condensing it down to a single variable across time from noon to noon for a single baboon. And what you see is like during the day, like daytime hours, it's variable but high, and it sinks down to a much lower level at night with, of course, spikes of activity. And so using an algorithm that was developed for human sleep identification, we extracted sleep parameters from this and then used thermal videography as a behavioral validation for sleep. So baboons like us, I don't actually see anyone here doing it. I guess it's pre-lunch. It's pre-lunch for you. When we fall asleep, we lose muscle tone, right? We get that characteristic head drop. Baboons do the same sleep. It's the same thing. So a sleeping baboon has a characteristic sleep posture where its head is dropped. And so with this approach, we can train a model that does reasonably well. It's not really, if what you need to know is like, is a baboon asleep right now at this particular instant in time? It's not so good. 80% accuracy is maybe not good enough for that. If what you want to know is like kind of these more aggregate characteristics of their sleep, it does pretty well. I'm reasonably happy with this. However, and this is sort of a view to the future, with Paul Antoine, who's here today, we're working to actually do a proper validation of our algorithms. So this is a baboon sleeping at the Institute for Primate Research in Nairobi. And we've now collected some preliminary data where we have EEG and ECG, EMG, thank you, data on these animals. So we have the thermal video, so we can see the posture. We have an accelerometer, so we can see the activity patterns. And then we have the polysomnographic data, which will hopefully allow us to train an even better classifier, and also to be sure that what we're seeing behaviorally, our behaviorally validated algorithm, is actually corresponding with kind of the underlying neurophysiology. So I think one of the most important things that science gains by taking sleep research out of the lab and into the field is that in the field, sleep decisions really matter. If you're a baboon, leopards, well, if you're a baboon who makes it to adulthood, this is how you're likely to die. Baboons are the primary cause of adult baboon mortality, although baboons aren't necessarily very important in a leopard's diet. So there's this interesting kind of distinction. But baboons care about leopards, even if leopards don't always care about baboons. And perhaps because poor night vision makes baboons kind of incapable of mounting these kinds of collective defenses, baboons are particularly vulnerable to leopard predation at night in their sleep sites. And so like during the day, baboons will oftentimes successfully counterattack against leopards. I mean, they're still vulnerable, but they have defenses at night. leopard predation seems to be a real threat and seems to be very important. Meaning that the choices baboons make about where to retreat to at night and where to sleep are consequential to them. So I want you to keep an eye right there as I talk. What you're seeing here is a grove of trees where we have a baboon group that's sleeping. This is relatively early in the evening. Did you see that? That was a leopard right up the tree. He's right here right now. Keep an eye on him. They're incredibly nimble. So what you're seeing here is the way that a leopard infiltrates a baboon's sleep site, and potentially, in this particular case, he was not successful, likely because, I think I cut it out of the video, somebody in a pickup truck pulls up and leopard runs away. But we've now captured a number of these, but with thermal video, which allow us to understand how baboon groups respond when leopards infiltrate and what happens afterwards as a function of whether the hunt was successful or not. So each of these, so what you're seeing here is accelerometry data from about, say, 4 in the afternoon until about 2 the next morning, so centered on the nighttime period. Each color is a different social group. Each line is a different individual within that social group, with the darker colors meaning active or high activity, and the lighter colors meaning low activity. Anyone want to give a guess which group had a leopard attack this night? Bottom, yeah. So look at this. We're actually going to zoom in on that for a second. Yeah. So what you're seeing here is sort of around, I don't know, 7, 8, sort of the group kind of transitioning into this inactive state, and then in a very synchronized way, waking up. So just zoomed in big. And one of the interesting things is, like, you see variation in individual response. So an animal who became very active and stayed, or who became active and stayed active for a very long time. An animal who definitely woke up, but then didn't have that same extended period of activity afterwards. So we've got a lot of individual variation going on here. I also wanted to look at the time on this. The group is really only transitioning out of an inactive stage into an active stage at 9 in the morning. How many people here follow baboons? We've got at least a few. Does 9 seem late to you for your population to be waking up?
6.
Yeah. And if we go back here, you'll notice, like, this group typically wakes up at 6, but on this day, I don't know if this is catch-up sleep. I don't know if this is, there was a leopard here last night, I'm not coming to the ground. I don't know, we don't yet know what's going on here, but we're seeing changes in responsiveness, both in terms of how much they sleep and when they sleep in response to these leopard attacks. Yeah, so that part of the graph compared to this. Okay. So as I said, if you're a baboon, where you sleep is a really important decision, but it's actually not a decision, it's at least 2 decisions. At the group level, groups have to make a choice about, okay, do we want to go to that grove of trees or this set of cliffs? There's sort of this large spatial scale decision that has to be made. But then once the group has reached consensus and arrived at the sleep site that they've chosen, there's an individual process that has to play out where individuals position themselves within the sleep site. So, you know, we've gotten to our sleep tree. The first animal that goes up, you know, the various positions in the tree might vary in terms of how protected they are from the rain or the wind, how close they are to the trunk that the leopard might be coming up, a whole variety of kind of features, physical features. But then once one animal has decided, as they start to populate the site, social considerations start to play out. Maybe I want to sleep with somebody because we can huddle and that's that's good for my thermoregulation. But maybe I don't like that guy. So you've got social relationships influencing where individuals sleep, and also the fact that this decision-making process isn't a one-shot decision. You can change your mind, you can update your choice. So think I may have gotten a little overexcited with this animation, but this is so. Anyway, point being, it's complicated. So to try to get the data that would allow us to understand this decision-making process, we've been reconstructing the cliffs and sleep trees where these animals sleep, and then using thermal video to track their movements in and out of the sleep site, looking at how they position themselves, and then how they update those choices as a function of what the rest of their group does. This is really labor and time intensive. So we've been using automated intelligence, computer vision models, basically, to try to speed this process up. It's relatively, like, our baboon detector is reasonably good and reasonably accurate and reasonably fast. But the next step, which is taking all of these detections and knitting them into actual tracks like this, where you can actually track an individual's movement automatically, still requires a ton of manual work to like knit these tracks together. So progress is happening, but it is slow. But the idea is that we want to be able to track these decisions and then connect them to the underlying sleep quality. So the sleep as the sleep quality as the outcome variable. So you make choices, how does that impact the quality of your sleep? So what have we found so far? Well, what you're seeing here, again, we're going from noon to noon, so the nighttime is centered on all of these graphs. If you look across the whole population, so this is like an entire group of baboons data over all the nights they were tracked averaged together. You get this really clear picture that they're active during the day. As we hit astronomical twilight and then nighttime, they become inactive, and then they wake up again in the morning. And baboons sleep about 11 hours. The sleep period from when they go to sleep to when they wake up is about 11 hours. But of course, on any particular night, animals wake up. You get disturbed, you wake up, you go to the bathroom, you have a drink, we have a glass of water, whatever it is you're doing at night. And similarly, baboons have, so each of these blue lines represents a period where we detect that a particular baboon on this night woke up, maybe rolled over, maybe did something, went back to sleep. And so what this means is that they're not sleeping 11 hours. We estimate they're sleeping about 9 hours a night. Still sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I wish I slept 9 hours a night. Interestingly, kind of their wake up is really highly constrained. They seem to really wake up at first light. There's a lot more variance within the population in terms of when they fall asleep in the evening. And in contrast to humans, where humans show the opposite pattern, adult males sleep more than adult females, about 20 minutes more, and juveniles and subadults, although this is a really small sample size, seem to sleep less than adults. But I have to caveat this with, this is all animals that were big enough to be collared, so we're not really catching the little guys. So whether or not what true ontogenetic development or the developmental sort of patterns in sleep are, we don't really know yet. We do find, however, that location really matters. So thinking about these social and ecological trade-offs that animals face. So this is the grove of trees that this particular baboon troop that we studied in 2012 slept in along the Ecologie-Evolution River. They weren't all in the same tree. They kind of parceled themselves out across a range of trees along the river. And it turns out that some trees seem to be better for sleep than others. So in particular, I don't know, we don't know what it is, but you don't want to sleep in tree 4. Don't know why tree 4 is terrible, but nobody sleeps well there. Interestingly, location doesn't just matter in a good sleep site and bad sleep site way. It's interactive with the particular individuals. So it turns out that particular baboons have preferred trees that they like to sleep in. So we took an information theoretic approach where you can imagine if this was a baboon, that there are 5 possible trees that a baboon could sleep in. If they primarily sleep in 1 or 2, you can calculate sort of the entropy in the system. This represents a high tree fidelity, low information, high tree fidelity, high information, low entropy pattern. Here, where they're kind of evenly spread across, low tree fidelity, low information, high entropy pattern. So using a set of randomizations, we compared the empirical kind of entropy of sleep tree selection to a set of randomized and randomizations. And what we found is that, in fact, yes, baboons do have preferred places to sleep. It's a relatively high information pattern. And when baboons sleep in the trees that they prefer, they're more familiar trees, they sleep better. So on average, it's about half an hour more asleep when you get to sleep in your most preferred tree. We also, in this 2012 data, captured one kind of major disturbance event. It was a leopard attack. And after the leopard attack, the group moved from this grove of trees I was just talking about to another sleep site about 1 kilometer upriver. And so this gives us a chance to look at how does sleep vary as a function of leopard disturbance or predatory attacks, predatory risk. So this is sort of the baseline, standardized to 0, kind of baseline level of sleep quality. On the night of the attack, we actually don't see a major change in total sleep time, which actually, when you think about that graph that I showed you, that figure I showed you from before, it's not the same event, but if we were to sort of think that maybe a similar thing happened, maybe this is because maybe they aren't sleeping less because they're sleeping longer. And of course, we have to caveat, we don't know that that's sleep. It could just be that they're sitting very still in the tree much later into the morning. But so we don't see this big effect on sleep, which really surprised me, at least in terms of total sleep time. However, when they change sleep site, we see a big decrease in their sleep quality, which then rebounds after the first night at that new site and stays sort of back at baseline. So this is consistent with a really well-documented effect in humans called the first night effect. It's maybe if you guys have gone, when you travel, your first night in a hotel, you sleep like crap. We don't sleep well in new locations, maybe neither do baboons. Okay, so I've told you a little bit about some of the socio-ecological trade-offs we're finding. I want to focus next on sleeping in a group and what it means to sleep socially. So one of the challenges, but I guess also one of the exciting parts for me about this is like, there's really almost no theoretical work on the social, like on sleep as a social process, which is frustrating in the like there's no low-hanging fruit. There's little low-hanging fruit to test, but also exciting because there's room to learn and to do development ideas. The exception is there is this idea called the sentinel hypothesis. So you guys are presumably familiar with like the many eyes effect, the idea that when you are in a group, one of the benefits is that you, by having many animals potentially looking out for predators, you increase your overall vigilance and increase the chances of detecting a predator, but also potentially get to invest less in vigilance because you have other animals who are helping you maintain that vigilance. The sentinel hypothesis is related, but kind of different. It's the idea that if you actively desynchronize your, in this case, wake-sleep patterns with members of the same group, you can sort of always have somebody who's awake and watching out. You can have a sentinel. So it's the idea that you're sort of, it's not just that you have many eyes, but it's an active desynchronization. So how do we test this? Well, you've seen this now before, but like this is a time series of kind of awake and asleep for one individual. You can fill it out for the whole group. And you can see like there are periods when the whole group is awake, there are periods when the whole group is asleep. But how do we know if this is more or less synchronized than you'd expect by chance? What we did to test this hypothesis was we did a series of randomizations where we kept the temporal pattern, but then shifted it either forward and backward in time to sort of disconnect the individuals in the group's awakened sleep periods from each other, but maintain kind of the sequence of their sleep patterns. And if the sentinel hypothesis is correct, we would expect that the proportion of the group doing the same thing, if they are anti-synchronizing, we should have the proportion of the group doing the same thing being less than you'd expect by chance. That is not what we found. We have found higher proportions of the group doing the same thing. And similarly, if the sentinel hypothesis was correct, we would predict that the proportion of time with at least one member of the group awake should be higher than expected based on in a randomized data set. And again, that is not what we found. So we're finding functionally no evidence for active anti-synchronization. In fact, we find substantial evidence for synchronicity. So to further understand or to further investigate the social dynamics of sleep, we took another information theoretic approach and calculated the transfer entropy between the sleep states of group mates. So basically what transfer entropy is doing is giving you an estimate of the influence of my state on your state. So like if I wake up, how much influence is it having on the likelihood that you're going to wake up? And when we look at the total transfer entropy within the group compared to what we calculate based on randomizations, if it's a social process, we expect to see higher influence, social influence, and that is in fact what we find. So basically, I think it's reasonable to think about sleep as a collective behavior. It's a behavior where there is contingency between my state and the states of my group mates and where we are influencing one another. We're influencing one another primarily in kind of a negative direction. So the higher the number of baboons in a tree, the less time you sleep. And similarly, the more of your group mates who've woken up in the last minute, the more likely you are to wake up now. So basically, we're seeing this evidence for like awakening cascades, where I wake up and I wake everybody else up. My daughter does this to me. We can connect this to other kinds of social relationships, though. So what you're seeing here is this transfer entropy sleep network, so that my influence on your sleep, each baboon's influence on every other baboon in the group's sleep. Their dominance network and their affiliation network. And I should clarify, this is dominance based on the movement pattern, so it's based on spatial approach and avoid interactions. And the affiliative network is not grooming, it is amount of time spent sitting within 0.25 meters, which is the spatial resolution we can resolve during the day. So like co-sitting, which should correlate with grooming in principle. And what we find is that your influence over others' sleep increases with your dominance score and with your affiliation. So basically, you have greater influence over the sleep state of the animals that you're closely affiliated with and the animals you are dominant to. We then ran a series of network-based diffusion models where we're tracking these sort of cascades of awakening through the group. And what we find is that they flow through the affiliation network more strongly than they flow through the dominance network. And what this sort of all adds up to me is that highly socially central individuals lose some, it's not a huge effect, but lose about 15 minutes of sleep a night. So your friends wake you up. So sort of overall what we've shown, or what I've shown you so far, is that the costs of sleeping in groups, those collective sleep dynamics, are not shared equally across all members of the group. Some animals kind of pay a higher price. And it seems to be these like socially central, highly embedded individuals who pay more of the costs. And so that sort of gets me thinking, and we know that in baboons at least, but in a range of other animals as well, social bonds seem to have these fitness benefits. That socially well bonded, highly bonded individuals live longer in baboons, reproduce faster, have better infant survival, although maybe some data from Montpellier suggesting that's less true than we thought it was. But it also seems to come with constraints on time. You only have so much time in a day to do everything you need to do. Maintaining social relationships costs time. Grooming, all of those interactions cost time. And so perhaps what we're seeing here could be a pattern of adaptive sleep loss, depending on what they're doing. If animals wake up and groom each other at night, if they're sleeping less because they are investing in social relationships more in the sleep site, maybe this is actually not a cost, but a potential trade-off or benefit. Only sort of more information about what they're doing in the sleep site is going to help us understand this. So, moving on to just finish up with what we've done so far, I want to talk a little bit about the choices baboons are making in their broader social landscape. So baboon groups aren't alone. They're sharing a landscape with a whole bunch of other baboon groups. So what you're seeing here, each color is just one tracked animal per group in 4 social groups. And on the landscape that they're living in, safe sleep sites, safe sleep refuges seem to be limited. Interestingly, we find that across a number of the sleep sites in this population, not only do multiple groups use them, they'll sometimes use them at the same time. Groups will come together and share the same sleep site, which surprised me. Anyway, it wasn't what I was expecting. And this comes at a small but quantifiable cost. So you sleep less efficiently, slightly less efficiently on nights when you share a sleep site with another group than when you don't. You wake up a little bit more often, you wake up more frequently, and you have a decrease in your total sleep time. This is probably not super surprising. I wasn't necessarily super surprised. However, I was surprised by what it seems to lead to. So we wanted to look at intertroop relationships. And so to do this, we calculated the dyadic distance between all of these groups. So what you're seeing here is functionally a histogram. It's a number of times that animals in different groups are within all of these distance categories. And this is the empirical data. We then did a set of randomizations of their trajectories to calculate how often would we expect them to be in close proximity to one another. And what we find is this really interesting pattern where it doesn't look like groups are avoiding each other, which is what you might expect based on kind of my reading of the baboon literature before I got onto the ground. Instead, what you see is at these close dyadic distances, baboons are actually more frequently in close contact with other groups than we would expect by chance. It's a pattern of attraction, not avoidance. And actually, this pattern of attraction, not avoidance, is 100% explainable by the subset of nights where 2 groups slept at the same site, not because we've included that sleeping together in those interaction data. That interaction data is only daytime data. However, after sharing a sleep site, 2 groups in our population are much more likely to travel together, sometimes for up to 3 days, as if they were part of the same group. So they come together at the sleep sites, and then they will oftentimes travel together. Watch the screen in blue groups. They've shared a sleep site, they're about to wake up, and then they travel together. So this surprised us. So sleep site sharing seems to disrupt sleep, but it seems to catalyze social tolerance. And so it's this weird it's apparently like kind of bi-directional feedback where, when you encounter another group at your sleep site, and choose to sleep together rather than go off and find a new place to sleep, you potentially sacrifice a certain amount of sleep. You experience a certain amount of sleep loss. However, it seems to have this impact on intergroup dynamics. And so I forgot to say this in the previous slide. Given that there was an interaction, given that 2 groups came together, the likelihood of them traveling together is much, much higher after sharing a sleep site than on days when they came together but hadn't shared a sleep site the night before. So it does seem to like have this impact on the intergroup dynamics. We don't know yet what they're doing at night in the shared sleep site. What is the basis for, like, what is the social interaction basis for this intergroup pattern? But I think it's going to be really exciting to find out. Okay, so just to summarize, I think what we're seeing here is that a physiological need for sleep causes baboons to search for safe sleep refuges. And because these are limited on the habitat, like on the environment, you get this co-location in space and time at shareable resources, which may lead to these tolerant interactions across social borders, across group boundaries, and potentially start to shape kind of a multi-level or incipient multi-level sociality. And I think this is interesting because when you think about many of the multi-level species that have been described, whether it's geladas, guinea fowl, hamadryas, limited sleep sites seem to be a feature of many of those habitats. And we care about multi-level sociality because we are also multi-level social. Okay, so everything that I showed you so far is kind of from pilot set of data we collected in 2012 that sat on a shelf until COVID hit, and one of my grad students couldn't go to the field and was like, yeah, we have all that acceleration data that we didn't do anything with. And he dove into this and sort of started this research program in my department. We now have some funding from an ERC grant to expand this out. And I'm just going to give you, I know I'm a little bit late, I'm going to give you just a few slides just to show you what we've done so far. So we've now managed to expand from a single group out to 17 groups, 200 animals that are collared at the moment. We're hoping to hit 300 across 30 groups by the end of by the end of the spring. And what you're seeing here, each dark circle is one of the sleep sites. The colored lines are the transitions between sleep sites by particular groups. So like this group tends to travel from here to here, from here to here, but doesn't ever travel from this sleep site to this sleep site directly on subsequent nights. Maybe you've noticed like the weird linearity of some of these sleep sites. Any guesses on what's going on there?
Road.
Road would be a good guess, but where are you going to sleep on a road?
Arena.
They've started sleeping on electricity pipelines. A high tension power line was put across this habitat in 2017. And slowly, culturally, so it started out with this bronze group up there. We think we're seeing cultural transmission of this because a male transferred from the bronze group down to this group. Anyway, they are using these high tension power, the pylons of these high tension power lines as sleep sites, and it seems to be spreading throughout the population. It's, well, I guess a leopard can't get up there. What you come in here, like those other figures I showed you. So this is 150 individuals across the groups. And I think we're starting, I mean, so big caveats. This is not sleep, this is just activity, inactivity. Again, blue is inactive. This is like reversed. The darker color is inactive, the lighter color is active. And it's not the full 24 hours. It's like right around the sleep, basically the darkness hours, slightly more than that. But I think that what we're seeing here is interesting, in part because there's substantial variation. So these are two individuals in the same group who are showing very different patterns. As I said, this is not final, so don't hold me to anything I'm saying here. As we have a lot of work to do before I feel really confident about this. But I feel confident looking at this and saying there is individual variation. And not only is there individual variation, I think we're also seeing group variation. So all of these individuals belong to one social group, and all of these to a different social group. Their patterns look quite different. So I think we're seeing individuality in the sleep phenotypes. It's going to be exciting to try to tie this to for example, to the genetics. There are known genes in humans that are associated with morning lark versus night owl phenotypes, with short sleep phenotypes. I think it's going to be exciting to go that direction and see whether we're seeing similar associations in this baboon population. And I'm really curious about, maybe you guys are aware of the meerkat paper that seemed to show that like different meerkat groups emerge early or later from their sleeping burrow. And that individuals acculturated. I'm curious to see if we see sleep cultures in these baboons, and because we have so much movement between groups, whether we see a similar acculturation pattern and whether we can separate out what is individual level variation from group level variation. And then, well, but one of our problems is that we have to tackle this question: what is a group? I have to admit, so I studied capuchins in my dissertation, and capuchin groups are like discrete units, like they're super obvious. And I guess I sort of, from my reading about baboons in the literature, baboon troops seemed like these discrete units. I didn't think the question of like having to grapple with what is a group was going to be a problem that we had to deal with. What you're seeing here, each line is an individual, and their spatial positioning on the y-axis is like where they slept. So like the very top is really far away from the very bottom. So it's just like a spatial scale. And like all that I'm pointing out here is that you have some groups who are like consistently together and consistently sleeping in the same spots, and they stay together. And then you have like chartreuse, where you've got that yellow individual who goes away, comes back to his group, goes away again. And then you have groups that are fissioning and fusioning. So we have a ton of social flexibility in this system. And I honestly don't know. If this population is weird. It's possible. It's possible this is a weird population. It's possible that, it's possible that there's just more social flexibility. I also sort of wonder, I mean, to have callers on this many groups gives you a very different view of what's going on in the population. Is this something that, as an observer on the ground, that you miss? You don't see an animal for a couple of days, you just assume you didn't see them, but that they were there. So how much of this is like real difference, and how much of this is just a different measurement technique? I don't know, but this question of how we define a group is breaking our heads at the moment. So anyway, we've got lots of exciting stuff planned, but so far more questions than answers. So just to finish up, I hope that I've convinced you that social and ecological pressures matter, and that what goes on in the lab is not the same thing that goes on in the field, and we need more research on sleep behavior in the field. The other 50% needs some attention. I hope I've also convinced you that it's worthwhile thinking about sleep as a social behavior, and that there are interesting questions that arise from thinking about the collective dynamics that shape the costs and benefits of sleeping together versus sleeping alone. And finally, that sleep is a multi-scale process, and that co-sleeping may promote these higher level social connections. And just to finish up, I really need to highlight Carter and Roy, who are and the rest of, and Chase and Allison, who are key to this project, but we are of course embedded in our whole group of our department and our collaborators. And I'm happy to take questions if I still have time. I'm sorry I ran over.
Thanks a lot for your talk. Are there some questions? Yes, a bit. Can you speak loud, please, because we are not sure about how people online will hear the questions.
I'll try. Like, I was intrigued by your observation that socially connected individuals sleep less. So is an alternative explanation that because there are health benefits of being socially connected, you need less than those who are more socially isolated? They are in poor health and they need to catch up somehow. So it's not, maybe it's not a cost, it's just another actually sign that they are doing better.
Yeah. So for those of you online, the question was, is the fact that socially connected individuals sleep less, perhaps not a cost to them, but actually just a reflection of the fact that socially bonded individuals are maybe in better health, and so maybe the less sleep is not a cost, but in fact just representing a better status. Is that correct? Okay, it's a really good idea. It's interesting. I've been thinking of it primarily from kind of the framework of being a cost, but I think that question of like, what is the baseline sleep individuals need is poorly defined. It certainly would be possible, for example, if socially more peripheral animals are also more likely to be sick. There are a variety of reasons why have higher stress. There are a whole variety of reasons why it might be true that if you're socially central, you perhaps need less sleep. I have to think about how we would tease that apart, but it's a really good question.
Thank you for your talk. So you say the socialized animals sleep less. So then, do you think the group size can affect the sleep duration?
Oh, I can't wait to look at that. Yeah. So I can imagine a variety of pressures that kind of push in different directions. Sorry, the question for people on
Maybe
you hear fine?
It works well, so.
Fantastic. Okay, then I won't repeat. So thinking about it from like kind of benefits of sleeping together, you know, if you're in a bigger group, more dilution effects, more many eyes effects, like a variety of kind of protections from predators. And so maybe you would predict that like bigger groups might sleep better because maybe individuals are safer. Maybe you have to invest less in vigilance. Maybe you're less kind of reactive. You're sleeping deeper, perhaps. When we look at these awakening cascades, which I forgot to say, when I said that they flow through the affiliation network, we don't have it fully in the model yet, so there's a slight caveat, but it looks to us like that's not a function of spatial. It's not that friends sleep together and therefore wake each other up. It's that it seems to be truly independent of the spatial location, which is weird but cool, if it holds. But with these awakening cascades, you know, I would expect those to be more problematic at larger group sizes because more individuals, like the chances of somebody waking up and it spreading seems probabilistically more likely to me. One of the cool things about baboons is they have tremendously variable group size. So, you know, the smallest groups that we have tags on are about 20 animals, and the biggest are over 100. So we're going to have tremendous group size variation. I don't know the answer yet, but it will be very cool. And also, sorry, I was going to say this, like when we think about the quality of a sleep site, I think there's likely to be an interaction effect with group size, right? That what's a fantastic sleep site for a small group may simply not fit, may not be available to big groups because there aren't enough positions within it for all their members, or may not be. So I think that, like, there's this interesting interaction between where animals choose to sleep and their group size, and how then individuals experience the site.
So I think there's one question on mic.
Yes, are you planning to measure cognitive performances reflecting a potential lack of sleep?
Yeah, so that is part of, so we haven't done it yet, but that is part of what we want to do. So we've developed these pit tag controlled feeders, experimental feeders, where we can allow access or deny access as a function of individual identity. And part of what we want to do is use those to sort of create, tests of cognition in a way that lets us look at both individual ability to solve tasks and also group ability to solve tasks, with the idea that, like, yes, like basically like as a way to assess what is the performance cost of induced sleep. We haven't yet gotten the permission yet, but we also would like to sort of do some sleep disruption experiments where either at the group level or at the individual level, we create slight sleep deprivation. I'm not talking about like no sleep. We haven't gotten permission yet, but on the other hand, the British Army holds training exercises in our field site, and they bomb. They do live fire exercises near the sleep site, so I think that we won't even have to do experiments. I think we can just rely on the British Army to wake all the baboons up for us.
A bit related to this, you often talk about quality and efficiency, but what is a good sleep quality? What is the efficiency? And I think measuring the performance could be an idea. But how do you manage this, and how can you say that this is a good sleep or bad sleep just on quantity of inactivity?
No, it's a really good question. I mean, sleep quality in many human studies is assessed by your own satisfaction with your sleep, which we have no way of asking baboons. So how do you feel about last night? Do you feel well rested? I guess I can think about, I can think of a couple of ways. I think that fragmentation, well, I guess your work shows that fragmentation doesn't necessarily, so Paul Antoine has done some work with penguins that I encourage you to go online and look for the videos of. It's painful. They sleep in these like micro bursts of like just seconds at a time, presumably to try to keep the egg predators away, right? But anyway, it looks like, watch them, like your heart breaks for these penguins that are like waking up constantly. So I mean, fragmentation to me seems like a negative thing, but I agree that we don't actually know what impact it has. And if you can get enough sleep in these microsecond bursts, so I think that from my perspective, I think there are two ways to get at it. One would be, can we measure sleep depth? And I think that the social context of this actually provides a way forward with that, because you can look at, okay, given that my neighbor woke up, what is the likelihood that I wake up? So like an amount of movement from your neighbor, maybe, and whether or not you wake up, maybe a way of kind of naturalistic experimentally testing this. We're also developing collars that incorporate like a vibrator with, and my vision, if we get there, is that you could sort of like ramp up the vibration to the point where they wake up to assess this, but that's never going to be a scale thing. And I actually think that when you think about it, like how they behave the next day is really the proof in the pudding. Like what impact the sleep has on the things that matter. So decision making, your ability to socially interact and not get yourself in an escalated fight because you misread the social situation. At the group level, the ability to coordinate movement, the ability, how fast groups are able to make decisions, what the quality of those decisions are. And I think that that's where these experiments are going to come in handy. So like one of the things that I would like to do is vary kind of the return rates in patches and see how well individuals and groups are able to kind of assess optimal departure times, or like respond as if they've assessed optimal departure times in terms of leaving one patch to forage and the next. I think there are a variety of ways that we can tweak classic cognitive experiments from captivity and implement them in this context. And so I think that's sort of the direction that we're going. Did that fail to answer your question?
Well, I think there is also it's a very difficult question, and the measure of the performance is the problem, and we don't know about the variability of sleep and the flexibility.
Yeah.
Because we all suffer from sleep deprivation, but we don't know at what point it's the same for other animals in the field and what they are tolerable to sleep disruption. And that's the most difficult thing to assess in the field.
And I think it connects with the question here in terms of like,
Exactly.
how do you interpret a certain amount of less sleep? If it's better quality sleep, it doesn't necessarily, unless you can get both quantity and quality, it's hard to understand.
Yeah, that's why duration for me is not quality, and fragmentation is not quality.
Yeah.
There are two more questions, and then we'll stop.
Yes. You showed us that sometimes two groups sleep on the same thing. Do you know if when it happens, these groups are more related, genetically related, than two groups sleep randomly in the population?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. We don't yet know the answer. We have our first round of, so I mean, as I'm sure many of you deal with, Nagoya Protocol requirements make doing genetic analysis challenging, perhaps particularly challenging in Kenya. But we have the first round of genomic data back from sequencing. So I'm hopeful that like we will have answers to that, but we don't currently.
Take of the newborn that's a normal night. How does it affect the group?
It's a really good question, and the moms. So from the 2012 data, we only had 2 females that had clinging infants, and they did have more maybe not worse, more fragmented sleep than other individuals, but not sort of like, we didn't have sample sizes to look at that. I am unaware of any work that's sort of mapped the ontogenetic trajectory of like how you go from like, basically like, do baboon infants traverse kind of a similar process as human infants in terms of the way their sleep goes, like consolidates and sort of how they acquired the adult phenotype. But certainly, based on my own personal, totally non-scientific experience, having infants in your group impacts the way you sleep and the way your group sleeps. And I would imagine that it's a similar context here. Yeah. But I think, I'm sorry, to go one step further, I think like we're never going to be putting tags on infants. Like that's not going to be a feasible or a ethically appropriate way forward, in my opinion. But I think that you could, with the thermal video, potentially get at some of these questions about infant sleep in a fully non-invasive way. And it would be really interesting to map those ontogenetic trajectories. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.